Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. We are 1 day away from being at the halfway point of the 2021 fantasy footy season. Well, of the 50 most relevant countdown anyway. We're nowhere near halfway the fantasy footy season. Number 26 today, CP5, Christian Petracca, and a chat about him. He's probably one guy that I know he's a big ripping fan of. Maybe it's because he's a Demon supporter or he just loves good footballers. I'm talking about Kane. Hello, mate. How you doing?
Very well, MJ. This was a guy that, if we rewind 12 months, we were debating with a few people how real his preseason was. And I know that we were pro Petracca in last preseason.
Yeah.
We've never seen him, attract so much of the ball in a game like he showed in that incredible preseason performance he had. And it was one of those ones that actually carried through. He kept that role and he went from a guy that was a, half forward, a little bit of time in the midfield to a genuine dominant inside midfielder and kept that scoreboard impact when he went forward. So phenomenal breakout year from Petracca, one that I think we were waiting on for a while. It arrived in a big way. But the landscape has changed as we enter 2021 because he is no longer a forward.
Yeah, he is just a pure midfielder for us. And much like Patrick Dangerfield, a similar style of player, took a little bit longer for him to hit his breakout year. But at 25 years old, you could safely believe there's a minimum 5, 6, maybe 7 years of premium territory Petracca for fantasy footy coaches. His highest score last year in SuperCoach is actually his career highest score as well. It's a 160. That was against the North Melbourne Football Club. While in AFLFantasy and DreamTeam, it was a 109. That's not an adjusted score. His career high score, not adjusted, is a 110 against the Cats from just a couple of years earlier. So if you play greater weighting of the adjusted averages score, okay, sure, then that was his career high score in that format. If not, cool, you got to go back a couple of years against the Cats. Last year, that average in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam, an 86.4, or if you want to play the adjusted averages, that's a 108, while in SuperCoach, just shy, not far off that magical 120 marker for us. It was 117.5. In that format of SuperCoach, he is going to set you back just over $630,000. Just under 800K in Dream Team and 825,000 in AFL Fantasy. And all signs for years came, we're talking about this breakout. We saw moments, we saw quarters, we even saw a game or two every now and then where Petracca got that midfield role and opportunity, but he didn't just take a hold of the opportunity given to him by Simon Goodwin. He hit it out of the park and proved to be probably one of the most dominant midfielders in the game last year.
Yeah, and he's actually probably in contention with Max Gawn and Clayton Oliver as who is the most valuable Demons player, because when Petracca played really well, Melbourne tended to win, and it's reflected in his scoring. When you look at the 9 games that Melbourne won, Petracca averaged 115 DT and 131 SuperCoach points.
Wow.
And in those 9 games in SuperCoach, all of them were tons. So it wasn't like there was a few really big scores that pushed it up, while there were some high ceiling games, like you mentioned, in the 160s. Again, the floor in wins was over 100. So that's incredibly impressive. And again, in losses, 100 DT and 103 SuperCoach. So not disastrous on the flip side. But it was the nature of his game that really, really impressed me. You mentioned, obviously, we were in shortened quarters last year. So 1.25's been that yardstick we've used to convert stats. So Petracca averaged 24 touches last year in a shortened game. 1.25 on that takes us to 30, MJ.
Gosh.
Averaged 30 touches a game for 17 games. If you look at his career before last season, his most touches in a game was 29. Now he's gone a whole season averaging 30 touches a game. Kick to handball ratio is the same. So 15 kicks, 15 handballs, if we look at it like that. If we convert his marks and tackles, it's about 4 a game each. And then he was just shy of a goal a game in shortened quarters as well.
Yeah.
So that's the type of guy that is really hard to shut down, because if you look at his lowest disposal game last year, again, it jumps out. It's 15 disposals. But when you dive deeper into it, it was the game he went forward against the Saints and kicked 4 goals and won them a game in the forward line. That's why he's such a good SuperCoach player in particular and such a hard fantasy player to stop, because if it's not working in the midfield and if he's not getting enough of the ball there, MJ, he can be swung forward and have a big impact in a very short period of time. And he's a player that there's not many players that want to match up with him in those parts of the ground, is there?
And from a fantasy footy matchup, like he's just really difficult. So if you feel like you can get a hold of him with that right matchup inside forward 50, well, then he'd go into the midfield and expose you, or do that in the exact reverse. You're looking through some of the data of what he delivered last year. You mentioned that increase in possessions. He ended up ranking 4th in the AFL for total contested possessions, 6 for score involvements, and 12 for inside 50s. That's not even per game averages, which are considerably higher. That's just total of what he did. And if you think Melbourne can improve inside forward 50 with now a bit more structure around that forward 50, with Ben Brown coming in, hopefully another year of development of Sam Wiedemann. Pickett spent another year, and as a small, he should hopefully be able to impact. That's, again, as we try to look for, can he improve or can he maintain what he did in a new year? These are some of the things we look at, because last year he ended up delivering a fantastic year for us. He ranked first for all forwards in SuperCoach in both averages and total points, cleared the second by over 200 points. He averaged 117, 13 tons, 9 over 120, 6 over 130, 199 score. So, just missing out on that ton. And just, you alluded to that one game already, just that one score in SuperCoach below 80, while in DreamTeam and Fantasy, an average of 86, that's adjusted at 108. At 2 tons, 5 additional scores, 90 plus, 4 additional scores, 80 plus. So that's 11 of his 17 games. If you're playing the adjusted averages game, that are 100 or more. And he had just 2 scores below 73 all year. Again, there's some flaws in putting the 1.25 to everything, so you can't bank on that too much. But just to help us understand how good and how consistent his season was, if you were to play the adjusted averages game off his lowest score last year, it's the equivalent of an 86. So here's this guy who scores in every column, who's really hard to stop, was consistently one of the best across all lines. And then something he doesn't get enough credit for is he's just incredibly durable. Outside of that ACL injury that ruined the start of the year, he's missed 1 game of home and away footy in 5 seasons. And so he's durable. He demonstrated a scoring ceiling. He lifted that scoring floor. And he's a legitimate point of difference this year, because when people lose a dual position status, they flock away from them. But if you look at him in contrast to other midfielders, he's right up there in the top of the bunch with what we've got available this year anyway.
Yeah, I think there's a few things, MJ. Clearly last year was his breakout year. And I think you have to almost disregard the 2016 through 19 seasons, because the role he's playing is so dramatically different that you just can't compare them. So obviously the issue then is, I've got 1 year of seeing Petracca at his best. I think the way he plays, especially how he played last year, he had a lot of impact in those games that he played well in. And as a result, with a smaller, he took a bigger piece of the pie. We've spoken about that a lot in SuperCoach. The weighting was definitely going the way of players that were having a big impact. And we saw there was a lot of big averages, almost record high averages with Gordon and Neil in particular. So is there actually value in Petracca? Where can he improve? I looked at his time on ground. It was up at 90% last year. So maybe you can get a percentage bump, 1 or 2% at best. Maybe. I think 90 is, again, if he could hold that, I think that's about all we can ask
quarters,
for.
If he could hold that, spend some more time forward.
Yeah, and obviously that gives him, more chance to score as well, because he's on the field more. I don't think he's the type of player that the shorter quarters will see that fall away dramatically, especially when he's playing that split role at times where he can rest forward. Turnovers, he was high. He was the third. He had the 3rd most turnovers per game. So if you want a category that if he could, tighten up that area, his kicking efficiency wasn't great either. It was actually ranked below average for the league. Again, it's hard to criticize a guy who has a poor kicking efficiency when he wins so much contested ball.
Yes.
And when he has so many shots on goal as well, he gets punished for that. So MJ, to me, the best case scenario in SuperCoach is 120. So really, your best scenario is you're getting what you pay for, pretty much. And I think that's one of the reasons in this season, with a bit of value around, that people will look past Clayton Oliver. On the flip side, it's also a pretty busy buy round, isn't it?
Yeah, look, that's probably what, if you look for reasons, why am I not picking him? It's I'm chasing value and that buy round. So he shares that with the Adelaide Crows. So let's say Matt Crouch in terms of the midfield, that is probably the most notable through there. Collingwood, maybe you're looking at a Taylor Adams as a candidate through there for Fremantle. Nat Fyfe, certainly for Supercoach. Maybe you're thinking a breakout continues for Caleb Sarong, or you love the back end of the year of an Andy Brayshaw. They're through there. Jack Steele, Brad Crouch from the Saints. And then the Swans, you've got the ever reliable Parker and also Josh Kennedy rolling through there. So I suppose it all depends on the way you want to view it, isn't it? Everything in this part of the preseason is trying to avoid confirmation bias, but looking for stats, facts, figures, information too. Because, yeah, you can say, I won't pick him because of that, but there are reasons to pick him too.
Yeah, I think the hard thing, MJ, we know with that buy structure we've got in round 14 is that by that point, we probably want to have our 2 premium rucks.
Yep.
So we're already at a point now, especially in Supercoach and DT, where if we've got Gawn and Grundy, who I believe are going to be the clear 2 rucks again, I think Riley O'Brien can challenge, but what buy round does he have? The same as them anyway. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's the 3 ruckmen that are the clear standouts. If we've got 2 of those 3 by round 14, MJ, and we probably won't have a rookie ruck, it's very unlikely that we will. And I think we have to assume that we won't. And again, funnily enough, if we wanted to swing Rowan Marshall forward, he's also in this buy round. So I think if we've got those guys in the rucks, we're already down to, at best, 20 players on field for a buy. And as you mentioned, Adelaide, Laird in defence, Sydney, Lloyd in defence.
Yep.
Collingwood's got Chris Maynard, like Luke Ryan. So all of a sudden, you might be looking and going, I'm already down to, 20 players at best with having my premium ruck set up. I might have to avoid midfielders or defenders or forwards in these other rounds just to keep some buy structure so I can have at the very least 18. But as we know, when it gets to that point of the season, you can't rely on your rookies being around. Nope. So if you can at least avoid some of that buy chaos up front, I think that's another reason. If it's a 50-50 and you're weighing up a Petracca versus someone else from around 12 or 13 buy, you might be thinking, I'm just going to try to avoid a bit of pain. I've got not many players in round 12, and I'm rather, pivot to a Josh Kelly who's in that round.
Yeah.
Or someone else that you really like. And I think that might be a factor because, as I said, when you've got 2 spots already taken in a ruck line, and for me, those guys are clear cut.
Yeah, and Riley O'Brien's there who's third.
Pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Petracca's in that pack. I think that is a valid reason structurally to avoid a guy like Petracca if you think he's about the same. And maybe you want to target him, post round 14 to be the guy that rounds out your midfield. But we've spoken about that a lot. That round 14 has a lot of heavy hitters across all lines. And it's going to be a really tricky balancing act to juggle our teams and build our teams up to that round.
It's going to be fascinating to see how much weightiness people do or don't put on that 1 week. We certainly look at the buy rounds as one large chunk of football. But again, if you don't think about how that last week goes, you could find yourself burning 3 trades just to get 18 on the field and actually not improving your team. And so there's strategies and structures and things you need to look at, not just for starting squad, but for the way you go about upgrading them. I think what I like about Petracca, there's a few things, is that when we look at premium midfielders, and maybe if you focus on drafts for a second as a way to help draw the thought out, most people in the opening round, depending on where you get, are probably hesitant to lock away an M1 in the first round. They want to get that big premium ruck. You've mentioned a couple of them there. They want to lock in that Lloyd, that Dangerfield, that Dunkley, all these players, the big name players that are at the top of the tree. And midfielders, there seems to be a little bit of hesitation about, can I have the level of trust that I might have had previously? Like if you look some of the names, let's pick Lockie Neal. Still suffers from tags a little bit. Was a career year. Is it likely that he's going to see at least a downturn, if not at very best a hold? There's probably you could build that argument. Jack Steele, well, they've gone and added a previously top 10 average disposal winner in Brad Crouch across the whole entire competition. You look at Bontempelli and McRae. Well, they've gone and added Adam Treloar. That's another big mouth to feed through there. Kelly, Fife, Cripps, even Tom Mitchell, all coming off injury interrupted seasons or have an injury question mark around them. But you look at Petracca and you go, well, Melbourne haven't done really anything big to their midfield. He's shown that he can score well with the likes of Oliver, Brayshaw, Viney through there as well. And so all of a sudden where we might have some levels of questions and doubts about, oh, what does this guy do? Yeah, he's value, but he's got an injury risk, or he's at a top price, but he's got a new big premium that's come in. You can find yourself looking at Christian Petracca going, maybe he is not the top midfielder for the year, but maybe he's one of the safest that could be around that top 10 averaging midfielders for us in 2021.
I think that's a great point, MJ, because he's safe in a few avenues, like you mentioned. He's safe in terms of his durability's been great. Like you mentioned, the first year was ruled out with an ACL, and unsurprisingly, his first actual year he played, I say just, but 17 games is still pretty good for a guy playing his first season. And as you mentioned, since then, he's just missed one home and away game. So durability, we really have to give him a massive tick. I think there's safety, and you mentioned in the role. I think people realised at the back end of last year that Angus Brayshaw is not deserving of playing as a sole midfielder the way he's performing. It's clearly Oliver and Petracca, and then it's a combination of, Viney's obviously the first cab in there as well, but you could see a Tom Sparrow got some opportunity, and I think they want to roll a few other players through that. I don't think it's, Brayshaw's playing so well that we're going to push Petracca forward, because, again, and I still think it's going to be the case this year, Petracca's the best forward in Melbourne's team, and he's probably the best midfielder, on that equal plane with Oliver. But it showed a lot more of an impact when Petracca was the one getting it out of that midfield, especially when you've got the advantage of a Gawn that, most weeks you're going to have that edge. And he's a very creative player, MJ. I know I mentioned that he was right up there in turnovers, but some of that is the risk he takes with the ball. Like, he really does try to set up scores for his teammates and, again, take scores himself. So when you lay it out like that, Petracca just being steady in that regard is a positive compared to the chaos you mentioned that other players who are contending with him for this top 8 spot are going with. Because I agree, you can make a lot more negative cases for Cripps. Again, whether it's body, whether it's the rise of Sam Walsh and Setterfield. And obviously we know the Bulldogs is a chaotic mess. Again, Taylor Adams was sensational last year, but if we're looking at body and history, again, it's unlikely that he's going to play every game. And, what happens in that regard. So when you put it out like that, MJ, especially I think in SuperCoach, because I feel like there's about a 10-point built-in gap between Petracca's DT and SuperCoach just by the nature of how contested he is and how much score involvements he does generate. 110 is always around the mark. So, maybe if he falls off a little bit, it's not ideal, but it's definitely a guy that you can hold the whole year. Where you get in big trouble, as we know, is if you push a guy that's 105, 110 and they plummet to a 95.
Yeah, that stings.
That's where it gets really painful. And as you mentioned, when Melbourne wins, is it chicken or the egg? Does Melbourne win because Petracca played well, or is it vice versa? But the numbers show that he scores big. And it's not the hardest matchups to start the season. It's Fremantle at home, Saints, Giants, Cats, Hawks, Tigers, Roos and Swans. So really, it's probably a 50-50 if you were a tipster. You'd probably say Demons win half of those. Again, on the flip side, Geelong and GWS are probably the two that, and Richmond. But at the same time, we know Richmond's not as restrictive. They're not going to give a hard tag to Petracca. They're very hard to beat in the actual game. But what we're playing, you worry about a Geelong. You worry about GWS in the past when they monopolise the ball, especially when you're playing them away. And obviously, we've always got De Boer in there. That's always something that's a little bit of a worry. But I think Petracca is a bit more tag-proof than a lot of those other guys as well. So he's definitely under the radar, MJ.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely someone I have not seen in one team.
Nope.
Not one team. And he's got a scoring potential about him that can start the season 130 plus for 5-6 weeks. And again, it puts people in a lot of conflict about whether they bring him in or not, because if you want to bring in a player like that and your buy structure is already a bit compromised in round 14, it can get real messy real quick.
It certainly can. Look, for me right now, he's on the watch list. I don't have him in any of my starting squads, but he's not far from ruled out from every single format of the game. He's right in the watch list. What do I need to see in the preseason? Honestly, I probably need to see other midfielders in other teams keep disappointing me to make me go there. But he's certainly going to be a watch list and definitely an upgrade target in 2021. But where he goes in drafts is interesting because based on where he's ranked right now, he should be somebody's M1 because he's ranked 8th for total points of all available midfielders for us in Dream Team and Fantasy and 5th in SuperCoach. But I think others will see names that are lower than him and choose them ahead of it. So in SuperCoach, Cripps is considerably lower, but I would think 90% of the time in a SuperCoach draft, someone's going, I'm picking Cripps over Petracca. Or they see a Josh Kelly who is ranked lower. They go, I'm picking a Josh Kelly in Dream Team and Fantasy over him. So he's got the potential to be your M1, but you're likely only going to have to pay an M2 rate for him, which means he probably could go in the 3rd or 4th round, but based on scoring potential, he could deliver to you the value of a very, very early second selection, or even at best a very late first round. So he's a nice pick in a draft. I really rate him. Where are you taking him in a draft, man?
Yeah, I think MJ, the back end of the 3rd round, early 4th is your sweet spot. I think if you had the 3-4 turn, that would be perfect because I totally agree. I think people want to take Sam Walsh ahead of him.
Yeah.
I think there's some people who are even crazy enough to put Matt Rowell ahead of him. I think there's some guys, and this is why we've spoken about in these podcasts, I do see going for a big ruck, a big back, or a big forward as more important because depending on how you look at it, you could make the case that there's, you might have Petracca ahead of Neil and then someone else might have, Walsh ahead of both of them. So midfielder for me, I just want to see what falls to me because I can't split a lot of these guys. I feel like Petracca, though, is very safe. I feel like 100's about his floor in DT, and I think 110's about his ceiling if everything went well. And I think about the same in SuperCoach plus 10. So it'd be 110 SuperCoach to 120.
Yep.
I feel very safe with that. Again, I love Walsh, but I could see a scenario where he just holds ground. It's just there's a lot of variable. Yeah. So in my strategy in draft really this year is I want to lock away two of these, a ruck, back, or forward in my first 3 rounds.
Yep.
I want to have that. And then my 4th is probably going to be a mid. And it's whatever's available. If it's Jack Steele, if it's Walsh, if it's Petracca, again, as you mentioned the names, there's going to be some good mids that get overlooked because, as you mentioned, there's guys down the list that people go, oh, I love Matt Crouch's finish. And you might get comparable value.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a Cam Guthrie or a Mitch Duncan and these type of guys that can slide to you and yield the same return. So I think 4th round is where you'd love to get him.
Yeah.
I think if you took him in the 3rd, he's not going to hurt you.
No.
But again, he might not have that upside. Well, in SuperCoach, I think he does, but in DT, I don't think he has the upside of some of these other guys. I think there's a few guys that have a score build that could take them into the 110, 115 range.
Yeah.
Whereas Petracca's probably, you get what you get last year at best, maybe a point or two either side.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough call. Hey, mate, appreciate your thoughts today talking about one of your boys, Christian Petracca.
No problem.
If you want to go and read the article, it is online now for you at coachespanel.tv about him and all of the other players we have revealed so far in the 50 most relevant. Tomorrow we hit that halfway marker, but if you're one of our Patreons already, you know who's at number 25. If you'd love some early access content to these podcasts, as well as a bunch of other articles and exclusive opportunities that we don't let everybody else get, but our Patreons do, you can join that Patreon supporter group at coachespanel.tv. We get to the halfway marker tomorrow. Who's it going to be? Which line are we heading for? And which state do they play in? I'll tell you what, we played a lot of footy there last year, which pretty much means it's everywhere other than Sydney and Melbourne. We'll tell you more about it tomorrow.